Let me start off this episode of Intuitive Reactions by peeling the pages of history all the way back to the Camp David summit that took place between Clinton, Barak, and Arafat in July 2000. There is one story here that has been endlessly recycled and has by now become part of the political lore in that chapter of unsuccessful peacemaking. At the time, I was still in Jerusalem as second-track negotiator on behalf of the 13 traditional churches during the now defunct Oslo process. And during my coffee-friendly conversations with some politicians involved in this process, I soon learned that the late PA President Yasser Arafat was being pressured to come to an agreement at Camp David in which the fate of the old city would be decided too. What the Israeli side, with American support, wanted to achieve at all cost was a partitioning of the 4 quarters of the old city. According to this plan that Israel and the USA wanted to sell to Arafat, the Muslim and Christian quarters would go under the administration but not jurisdiction of the Palestinians, while the Jewish and Armenian quarters would stay under both Israeli administration and jurisdiction. I immediately realized that this was an unworkable solution. Bluntly put, a political landmine, as I believed the Armenian Quarter should remain part and parcel of the Palestinian territories. Any other agreement would cleave the old city and render it dyslexic, not only politically, but also practically in terms of the lives and livelihoods of its mixed residents. So as convener of the Jerusalem Interchurch Committee, I called for a meeting of the heads of churches, explained to them the manifold perils of such a partition were it to become acceptable to the Camp David parties, and invited them to sign a strong letter that I had drafted addressed to Clinton, Barak, and Arafat. In this letter, all 13 church leaders, including the late Armenian patriarch, His Beatitude Torkom II, emphasized that the Armenian Quarter cannot be wrenched away from the Palestinian polity and should remain with the Muslim and Christian quarters. The letter called upon the summiteers to reject any other formula. Well, as some of us know, Arafat resisted immense pressures and refused to sign on this unfair and skewed deal. In fact, he made one of his famous quips in which he said to the press afterward that his name was Yasser Arafatian. In other words, he was a token Armenian and would never relinquish Armenian Palestinian rights and properties to Israel. In fact, the whole Camp David summit flopped too, and with it, another nail was hammered in the Oslo political coffin. Much of this can be found in the archives of the New York Times, as well as in my book entitled The Armenian Church in the Holy Land, that was published in 2017. But let me now fast forward to 2023, to the rife rumors, allegations, and also admittedly assertions that the Armenian Patriarchate in Jerusalem has leased for 99 years, some 25% of the Armenian Quarter, to an Australian-Israeli businessman. This lease, if strictly true, was concluded many years ago, but suddenly burst into the open when the local agents of the Australian-Israeli businessman started making changes on the ground in the Armenian Quarter. This alerted Armenians to the alleged lease, and there have been protests and demonstrations galore ever since by the community. Suddenly, the Armenian Quarter has become a political epicenter for the Armenian, Israeli, Arab, and world press, and the guesswork of who did what and who gave away what has been preoccupying many minds and pens. The saying goes that there is no smoke without fire, and I believe this applies here too. The patriarch has not denied that there is a lease, but he shifted the blame on an assistant priest who was unceremoniously defrocked and kicked out of Jerusalem. The Israeli police came to the Armenian convent, put this priest in a car, took him to Ben Gurion airport, whence he flew to Turkey and from there to the USA. The questionable, highly questionable idea was to suggest that the culprit had been punished and exiled, and so all was well now. But this did not clearly assuage the strong feelings of Armenians in Jerusalem and across the diaspora, because the buck cannot stop with a priest. Such a lease, tantamount to a sale, if truth be told, could not have occurred without the approval of the patriarch. But even then, the patriarch shouldn't have legally signed on the lease document without the approval of the church synod, as well as the overseeing ecclesiastical committee. Neither body, I understand, met and neither party approved the sale. So what happens now, and perhaps why? This church soap, malevolent and ill-advised as it will have been, is nothing new to Jerusalem. The two churches that have the largest properties in the Holy Land are the Greek Orthodox and Armenian ones, in part as a hangover of Ottoman times. And there have been so many stories, chapters, legal cases, and scandals involving also the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate in the past. So much so that this latest Armenian instance is, to my mind, one that belongs to the same political theater. I recall how there was a time when two Greek Orthodox patriarchs lived opposite each other in the same building in Jerusalem. One, His Beatitude Irenaeus I, had been dismissed in 2005 due to his suspicious financial deals with Israeli parties in the sale of church property. Opposite him were the lodgings of His Beatitude Theophilus III, who had replaced him with the agreement of the Greek government and is still patriarch today. But be careful and don't think that such transactions are solely about money or shekels or dollars, whether gained illicitly or even through proper and approved channels. Nope. There are at least equally important and volatile political issues. The Armenian Quarter is smack in the heart of the old city of Jerusalem, and it represents the political and legal aspirations of Armenians and Palestinians. Remember what I just said in this episode about the Camp David summit in 2000. Arafat did not turn down the so-called peace deal that would have given the Armenian Quarter to Israel merely because of the number of zeros in US dollars that such prime real estate would bring in. It was primarily because this is occupied Palestinian territory, and selling it to a bevy of religious and colonial settlers would give Israel a foothold in the heart of Jerusalem. And this is treasonous. And whilst the large part of the community is ethnically Armenian and religiously Christian, they are culturally Palestinian. So back to 2023 and the alleged deal. Why do I keep calling it alleged? Well, not only because it is one of those favorite words used by us lawyers, but more crucially because I have not actually seen the lease document. In fact, hardly anybody has seen the lease except the patriarch, the ousted priest, and perhaps very few others within the inner circle. What property has been leased out exactly? How much of the Armenian Quarter has really slipped away from Armenians? How much money was obtained for the lease of the set sites in the Quarter? And key or central to my legal mind, what penalty clauses are there for the revocation of the said lease? I happen to be one of those who has been repeatedly urged to fly to Jerusalem and try to help mediate in this case. I know there are other Armenian American lawyers from Chicago who have been to Jerusalem already. But my legal position has been steadfast and, in my opinion, sound. I can only offer legal counsel or mediate or facilitate the denouement of this crisis once I see the document and its clauses. So much of the dust generated by various parties and measures taken by others, such as a withdrawal of recognition by Jordan and Palestine of the patriarch, according to the status quo agreement, or even the demonstrations or the press coverage to date, all the way from CivilNet TV in Yerevan to the BBC in Jerusalem. Well, there are not solutions in themselves, but what they do is create pressure for transparency so that the legal measures can perhaps be implemented once the details of the transactions become public. To be frank, I do not personally have a beef with the patriarch. As a lawyer, I've always tended not to personalize or emote issues. But as an Armenian who hails from Jordan and Jerusalem, I am deeply concerned by the white noise being generated without any clear understanding of the nitty-gritty details. And as someone who has earned many of his political stripes from this Israel-Palestine conflict, I would not wish to see these prime lands taken away from Armenians. So all I hope for is that the patriarch will realize that he has to come clean with the community. Being cloistered in his flat or refusing to see people, speak with them, or take their calls is unhelpful. The Armenian Quarter is a legacy, a heritage for all Armenians that goes back centuries, and they should be protected, not squandered for the sake of money or greed or as a consequence of political pressure or personal blackmail. So today, with this episode, I seek cooler minds and pray that it'll be possible to reverse the dials of the clock. Otherwise, it will be a disaster for Armenians in Jerusalem who are willy-nilly part of the Palestinian political fabric. Let us not forget for 1 minute how hospitably they were welcomed in Jerusalem and elsewhere across Palestine and in the Arab world with open arms by the Arab, Muslim, and Christian communities when Armenians fled the genocide during World War I and settled in Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, and elsewhere. The patriarch should know this better than I. After all, he hails from Aleppo. So am I whistling in the wind? I hope not, as I call for wisdom and perhaps horse sense. I'd like to conclude for now with a quotation from Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. That, for me at least, is precious because it also sheds light on this vulnerable situation in its own way. Gibran asked, "Is not the dread of thirst when your well is full the thirst that is unquenchable?" Think about that.